Welcome to today's podcast. And these few months, I've been revisiting some of the guests that I started the podcast 3 years and a half ago. It seems crazy. I started just with a crazy idea on a Zoom. Nicholas Pearson, thank you so much, Nicholas, for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm so excited to be able to catch up and revisit and talk about new stuff.
Awesome. And for those of you who may not know Nicholas, I'm going to put the link with his previous interview in the notes. And we go over his all origin story and discovery of Reiki. But just to give you an idea, he's a Reiki master and acclaimed author that lives in Orlando, Florida. He has been close to 20 years of practice and also very aware. You went to Japan, you really have researched a lot of it. You have a fantastic book about Reiki that is it's like probably big. It's one of the biggest book, but it's full of amazing information. And I'll give the name here. My whole cheat sheet disappeared, but it's here, Foundations of Reiki Ryoho. You also have a lot of books about crystals, flower essence, and many more. You're a very prolific author. It takes me 3 years to do a book. You do it in a year, and I still don't know how you do that. Perhaps that's why I should ask you, like, how do you do that? But what I would love to do is first, again, 3 years and a half, our practice evolves, changes. We had a beautiful interview. I still remember, especially about observing the ebb and flow of the energy. It was such a beautiful message towards Reiki. What has happened in these 3 years and a half? Like, do you feel anything has changed or evolved? Anything you would like to share?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that have maybe not changed about the technique in my practice, but certainly the philosophies I use to enact it in the world. The first time we got together, the world was in this kind of strange transitional place, and we were moving into um, more online spaces and having to do things remotely. And I was very much a staunch traditionalist. I will only ever teach in person. And so I just paused all my classes and I was able to resume traveling and teaching in person again. And there are just a lot of folks who still can't travel or can't make it to where I'm going to be. And I finally let go of a little bit of that resistance, and I've started some experimental online Reiki training, which so far the data I've collected, the feedback has been really encouraging, and so I'm gonna try a little bit more of that in the future as a supplement to my in-person classes. I've just gotten, I'd say, a little bit more fervent about making sure that there's room at the table for everybody. Um, we share a common practice, and although it has myriad expressions, it has so many different approaches and sometimes different titles and names and numbers of levels and different wording on people's certificates. At the core, there's only one Reiki. Reiki is this infinite cosmic phenomena, and how we relate to it might be very personal and different to one another, but it has been a pleasure of mine to make sure in my monthly practice sessions that I do online and in other spaces that everybody's welcome as part of that narrative, and that we ground it in the things that we have in common. So evidence-based Reiki history, that's you know relatively immutable as the evidence, as the data gets better, the narrative unravels a bit more, but at the end of the day, the data is the data. So if we can all just kind of find that as our common currency, that's really important. And I'm also open to a lot more what if than I used to be. We'll say being skeptically speculative, as if that's a thing, about maybe what some of the motivations were, what some of the cultural contexts were, what some of the roots were for the system of Reiki, and being open to just the mystery of it. It is a mysterious thing. In fact, it's right there in the double title of the Gokai. The secret method, the mysterious medicine. It refers itself to the system. So yeah, just basking in the mystery of it, I guess, is what makes it new and exciting for me, even almost 20 years into my practice.
I love that because it's also letting go of the need to be right and knowing. But on the same hand, also not going like, it doesn't matter what I do. Is that very you know, walk in the middle of the line. Like you still do very serious research, you still study, but you don't attach because, as you say, since the history keeps changing, we still discovering new information. And also like that need of knowing and being in the right, we let go with a practice.
Yeah, I mean, practice is the real teacher here. It is great to be a history nerd. I love it. Um, I I I've strangely found like a new audience in my Reiki classes. Lately, it's been a lot of folks in like the computer science and engineering and tech worlds have been attracted to my classes, which has not been historically the way it works, but these are people whose brains apparently work like mine, and I never thought to seek this audience out. And so having the data is nice, but the way it has always driven me is to kind of build this platform so we have an understanding of where it comes from and why we might do some of the things that we do. And then at the end of the day, you just have to do it. And it is only through doing it that we become a better practitioner. It is only through committing ourselves, surrendering ourselves, being open, being flexible, being empty, or as you said in our previous interview, being spacious. Um, that's what Reiki is. And if we get too rigid about the rest of it, we can't be Reiki. We get too focused on the right or wrong of the technique, the right or wrong of historical dates and names and figures and places, and we lose sight of why we're really here, which is to have that experience of non-duality, to have that experience of oneness, sameness, lightness.
I love that. And one thing I've been doing and encouraging some of my students to do is when someone practices very differently for you, use it as a reflection. What would that happen? What is one of the tips or the ways that you're trying, perhaps because obviously you have this state of mind of openness and welcoming everyone on the table, but not everybody. Some people are like triggered. So, what is one thing that you do to help people to embrace that state of mind of more open?
I mean, I'll use a recent example for this. I was offering a class on kind of like the themes, the principles, the historical data about traditional Reiki. And it was there in the title, just talking about traditional Reiki. And someone asked the question, do we see examples of using things like singing bowls and other things traditionally in Reiki? And my answer was no, we don't. That doesn't stop you from using it. I mean, absolutely. If this is part of your healing practice, I'm not here to tell you what you can or can't do. But if the topic is what did people do historically? Here's what the data says. Now, I'm going to invite you to do some self reflection and decide what you like in your own toolbox. Reiki is malleable as a practice. Reiki is malleable as a technique if we use it as an intervention rather than as a spiritual practice. Energy medicine, just that side of it. Of course, it does so many things and it supports so many other things. So, my best advice for folks who want to combine interventions is just be transparent and disclose. This comes from Reiki. This comes from something else. This comes from a third thing. And someone in the group was kind of, we'll say, triggered about my response, just saying, no, historically this isn't it. And so we had to have a conversation about like what was the topic, and you know, there's no judgment from me about what you do or don't do. The question was asked: Is this historical? And there actually is a right or wrong answer about that.
Yeah.
And that's not an ethically right or wrong answer. It's just a factually right or wrong answer. And there's no point disagreeing with the data. We can use it to inform our practice. That's all it's about. So come back to basics, stay present, and then remember that there's more than one way to do anything. And just because something is historical doesn't make it inherently better.
Yeah.
Just because something is innovative and expanded doesn't make it inherently better. What makes it a better and more effective practice is practice itself. Practice as a verb, not practice as a noun. It's not the thing, it's your relationship to it and how sincere you are in building that relationship. So, ultimately, I think self-reflection is key. And one of the pieces of advice that I give people on a practical level is go learn from somebody else. Go seek out someone who does it differently to you, whether that's in a book, in a podcast, in a class. I try to keep things fresh by training with a new teacher almost once a year. Sometimes they're like extended techniques. It's not specifically, Reiki Ryoho training. It might be something like trauma-informed Reiki training, or the Let Animals Lead method of animal Reiki, or um, medical Reiki master training with the late Raven Keys. I try to, learn from folks who do things in a way that is so different to my own, because it also helps me challenge my own rigidity. So for folks who feel that same kind of triggeredness, go learn from someone else, and don't, suspend disbelief for a moment. Don't worry about whether the facts, the data is correct. Look at their relationship they have to the system. And that should be what inspires you and drives you at all times.
I think that is, you said so many great things, but especially I think people, when you say like historically, like what was historically done is no better, and what is doing now is no better. Like I think that's where they trigger. They think then we're putting them in the wrong or it's incorrect. And there's no incorrect. We're not Japanese living in the 1920s, right? Where whatever we are, we may be Latinos living in Mexico. We're here, you and I in the US. Like everybody has a different cultural background, and that's going to be part of who you are in your practice. And I think that also, it's okay. Like we're enriching the practice. We're not literally, some people is like, you cannot deviate because then you cannot contaminate it or make it less. And that is also not true. It's because already Mikausu in their time, they were already being influenced by actually, the American coming in the 60s and opening of Japan. So they also were influenced. And I think that, and you and I have talked about, Justin Stein talks about it, like from the origin, this is a practice that was open to foreign influences, right?
Absolutely. Reiki has had this myth of Japanese exceptionalism embedded in it. I have been guilty of subscribing to and spreading this myself. And honestly, it's much a part of Japanese culture to ascribe things to this sense of exceptionalism. If we look at the endemic name, the endonym of Japan, Nihon or Nippon, it means sun origin, but more poetically, the land of the rising sun. This implies something, that the sun shines on Japan before it shines on anywhere else. And that sun isn't just, the glowing ball of light and heat and, burning gas in the sky. It's also the great 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 grandmother of the first emperor, of the current emperor of Japan. So like we're implying something special just by uttering the name Nihon in Japanese, and that kind of exceptionalism has led to the fierce rise of nationalism, which saw Japan enter, the Pacific War or the World War II to the rest of us. It has led to a lot of interesting attributions and ideas about Japanese language and culture and history. And these are not factually correct or incorrect things. It's just part of that really unique charm that Japan has about finding a way to synthesize stuff and yet still make it uniquely its own. And Reiki is kind of like that. It is very Japanese, but it's also steeped in lots of other traditions. We see, things that filtered into the land of Japan long before Usui ever walked the earth, and also things that were coming in his lifetime, just being, adopted straight into the ethos of what Reiki is and has become. And it's kind of a strange full circle moment to see the best scholarship from folks like Dr. Justin Stein talking about this circulatory development and the influx of ideas from, what he calls the Northern Pacific Network, really talking about things like North American spirituality and, this kind of Western, proto New Age movement, if we want to call it that, influencing the spiritual vernacular of Japan. And that ultimately influences Reiki. And here we are 100 years later, and we're seeing the same thing happen, but on other soil. The same kind of new age movement is still informing Reiki, but at the other end of its evolutionary stage. And it's always been at this kind of circulatory, almost helical development process. So I
And
think, go
no,
ahead.
I was thinking it's a little bit like language, that if it doesn't evolve, it's dead. like people say, oh, those people, Gen Z is changing the language. But if you literally don't have a language evolving, it dies. And perhaps with practices, there is a little bit of that element. If it doesn't evolve through the years, especially with when we're saying the last 100 years have changed, like really the way we live radically, then it will be a dead practice in a way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's another cliche, evolve or die. You have to change or you don't get the opportunity to stick around. I think that's true of us on a personal level. It's true on a planetary level. It's true of our practices, our languages, our cultures, our cuisine. Everything changes. And it is helpful to know what things used to look like as a barometer of that change. I always like to say, like, why do I care so much about Reiki history? Why do I care about the past if Reiki is about the here and now and the present moment? If you look at like the really esoteric sides of Reiki, it really is about presence, non-duality, now. So why all the other stuff? And it's because if we understand where Reiki has been, we have a roadmap for where it can take us into the future. And those facts are important for understanding that journey. Not everyone has to apply themselves to that study, but it is important that someone documents them, that hopefully multiple people from different perspectives document them, because every time that narrative is told, it's always got this implicit, maybe explicit bias in it, whether it's that myth of Japanese exceptionalism or something else. So having lots of folks collaborate on the story of Reiki is really going to help us as a community prepare for where it's going in the future. And where it's going in the future, I hope, is going to be more inclusive and more collaborative and more communal and filled with fewer and fewer of those like isolationist factions like we saw in the 90s and 2000s, and really see people being willing to have conversations about what is similar and not similar about one another's practices, and how at the end of the day it doesn't matter.
And I think I run, like, as you said, the more we know about the practice, there are two things. First, it guides how you practice, but also when you evolve it based on knowledge, versus just evolving it, almost like, I will not say lack of respect, but lack of, you're twisting it because the elements you're looking for may be there, but you haven't seen them because you don't have the knowledge to get those secret layers of knowledge that are behind very simple practices. But I think, as you said, we're moving towards that. I feel the last 2, 3 years, there is a lot more conversation, more openness. I think we also have, probably has to do with Zooms, online social media, where people have more accesses to have a voice and to have this conversation, which I think sometimes are hard, but we have to remember no one has the absolute truth, and we can just learn from each other.
Absolutely. And it comes back to my big advice: go learn from somebody else.
Yeah.
If we can just make space for one another in our respective little enclaves, and all of a sudden my little pocket touches somebody else's pocket, which touches somebody else's, and then it's just one big Reiki community, which at the heart, if Reiki is oneness, then we are one big Reiki community, and it's our our delightful, perplexing, frustrating humanness that gets in the way of that sometimes.
Well, I adore hearing people like, oh, I've reached non-duality. I'm like, oh, and are you talking to this other Reiki person? Oh no, that Reiki person is wrong. Like, I don't deal with them. I'm like, okay, like, and same with our bodies, right? Like, there is oneness, but I hate my body. Like, we also, I think sometimes we want to take Reiki very evolved and not to it, but sometimes also we have to take a step back and, again, I have to say, what is the basic concept of Reiki that doesn't change? And I mean, no matter what style, if I add crystals, dolphins, Japanese, with influence of martial arts like I do, are we true to the very basic, like, the precepts, like the oneness, and also those concepts like we're not the healers, we're just holding space. So for me, there are 2, 3 things that, that should be true to all lineages. And then, yeah, if someone is completely out of those, I may have a polite conversation, but I may not share as well, because then we have a different understanding of the basics foundation. I think that those, for me, like that oneness, the interconnection, and that we're not the healers, are really two of the most principles that then if we don't agree, it's going to be hard to have a conversation.
It's true, and that's why I work so hard to do outreach based on those kinds of things. If we have a better collective understanding of Reiki history, of the language used not just in Japan today, but in Japan 100 years ago surrounding Reiki, if we have a better understanding of the spiritual and cultural and linguistic and historical and political contexts out of which Reiki arose back then we're better informed about the why and the how. So our conversations today will track through that. And if we all come back to the same kind of evidence-based Reiki history, if we can all kind of get up to date as like the really dedicated academics give us more to work with, then we're going to be able to have richer conversations. We're going to be able to hold space for one another's differences so much better. We're going to be able to do so much more as a community because we're going to see how much we have in common. Even on the surface, when it looks different, if we have the right context, then we're going to place an emphasis on those same themes that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I had a lovely conversation with Rajashri Ma. She created Kaliki Reiki. And it was such a beautiful conversation because there was a lot of respect. And at the end, we realized as the foundation of both practices, like no matter how different they appear, we're the same. So what has been, you have been training with different people. What has been one thing that has surprised you from another, perhaps other way of practicing Reiki that may come to mind?
Um, what would surprise me? I think the biggest surprise is always my internal response to things, um, my resistance to want to try new things, which is funny because I'm all about try new things, but like I get it. We give the advice we need the most, and I'm happy to say that out loud and be the first one to identify where that needs to go. But when studying the Let Animals Lead method of animal Reiki, letting go of the need to do, it's okay to say that when I have a sequence of motions that I can go through. If it's not a specific sequence of hand positions, it's the fact that I get to use the hands at all. It's the historical information about how the hiho, the symbols and mantras, might have been used, and then to let go of that completely because we can't really approach the same relationship with Reiki on behalf of animals as we do for humans. They can't communicate their needs to us the same way. We have to presuppose a lot if we're going to approach them like we do humans, and that involves a lot of protection, a lot of bias, a lot of ego in some cases. So I had a little bit of resistance to wanting to, but but historically we know that this symbol was used in this way, but this animal can't tell me what its bad habit is. Why should I use this symbol the historical way? Because now it's about me and not about the animal. So, that's an example of one kind of thing. Um, Something else I would say that surprises me a little bit is the space for variation. Also, I among many other hats that I wear, I'm a collector. So yeah, I collect books, I collect rocks, now I collect antique instruments. Um, I won't say I collect degrees and trainings, but I like to collect comparative ideas about things that I care about, and seeing how folks can spell symbols differently. And I like to think of it as spelling differently. It's different orthography. It's not, it's not a drawing. These are linguistic in origin. All of them in some way are linguistic in origin in the system of Reiki. And to know that at the end of the day, it doesn't affect the end result of their practice. If someone is unconcerned with whether the grapheme that they've put on the chalkboard, so to speak, differs from Hawayo Takata's or Hayashi Chujido's or anyone else's, um, if they get the same therapeutic result, then maybe what we're tapping into is not the symbol itself. In fact, maybe the symbols themselves are empty. And this kind of also tracks with some newer data that I've seen come out thanks to the translation works of Rika Saruhashi, indicating that um, most of the symbols we know in Reiki were not used by Usui Sensei at all, which was like it's a tiny little footnote that recurs in her recent translation of one of Doi Sensei's books. Um, but it was like a really big uh-oh moment. Like, oh, I have to rewrite several chapters of a book now. I have to alter some context. I am wrong. Collectively, we were all wrong, but it's so funny how this is just a tiny little footnote there, but it really shifts our perspective. So, yes, sometimes the things that surprise me are internal, and sometimes it's like really big historical data that makes it feel like I've committed egregious errors. Um,
Well, yeah and no, because at the end, the symbols are a big part of the practice. So all your information in that beautiful book that explains the symbols, you know, and also I think when you start in Reiki practice, especially Reiki 2, like if you don't give these tools, and for me, they're training wheels, and almost like a trick, I'm going to trick you into thinking you can do things that you can actually do them without symbols. Like,
mm,
but because you have these and like, oh, look, now I can do, sorry, distance Reiki, I was going to show something. Like, because I have this symbol and I can like share this beautiful energy with you, Nicholas. But, and I will not believe I'm able to do that without the symbol. For me, then in my lineage, we let go of the symbol. Like when I do a distance session, I just go into a state of mind. I don't really use the symbol anymore unless I'm really distracted. But I think the beauty of the symbol, even if Usui had a very deep practice, years of meditation. He was probably enlightened. I am not Usui. And if you have told me when I started Reiki, when I was completely lost, I just wanted again to just get rid of my problems using magic. If you had told me you have the power to heal yourself, to support the healings of others, and you don't give me a symbol, I may not have believed it. So that's what I think also is like we also have to understand everybody's in a different journey. And yes, perhaps Usui didn't use the symbols, but that doesn't take any value of the symbols today. Or maybe I just too attached to them, I like them.
I mean, they're beautiful. What they
Yeah.
represent, sound, it is exquisite. For those listening who maybe haven't read Gende Reiki Ho as translated by Rika Sarahashi just yet, please do. But in it, she indicates that of the three symbols taught in the second degree, the only one shared by Usui with his students was the long distance symbol, the Jumon, the formula on Jazei Shonen. And it was really just that. It was a training wheel for his students who didn't have the connection already in place to be able to confidently perform Enkaku Chirio or remote healing. And that it appears that the first and second symbols were added during the second presidency, Ushida Sensei's presidency after Usui passed. So they're there for a reason. And obviously, Usui's successor in that organization made an intentional choice to place them into the system. And, the context of them matters. And even if we don't have all of those little details, the little like behind the scenes juicy stuff that I would love to have just to be a fly on the wall, just under 100 years ago and find out why and how, they're obviously there for purpose. They were placed there with reverence. They are derived from things that someone who's literate in Japanese culture and custom and language and symbolism would be able to spot from a mile away. Um, we shouldn't presume they don't matter because they don't come from Usui. We shouldn't presume that they do matter only because they were mystically revealed to him. If we choose a different historical narrative, um, they matter because of the practice. They matter because of the outcome. They matter because of the relationship that drives those things. So yeah, I will never stop using the symbols because I am a fallible human being and they provide something concrete that I can put my focus toward. And
Yeah.
to do that, it takes me beyond that into something that is empty, but also something that is infinite. But I need that finite tool. It's like I have to have a key that fits that lock, but what's on the other side of that door is more than the lock and the key put together.
No, I agree. And I think also when I think of the Reiki kanji, right? Heaven and earth. And then the first two symbols, literally another expression of heaven and earth, right? They're heavenly energy and earth. So you also see you can always perhaps have the kanjis more complicated. These are very simple ways of saying the same thing. And the other thing is beautiful, like, for example, the first symbol, right? Very simple, very based on traditional Japanese spirituality. But if you practice with it, just observing it and staying with it, you start getting different layers and different nuances, and you can practice with that same symbol for years and go much deeper into your practice. So for me, I think also, as you say, especially now we're crazy busy, phones, everything, these are just like anchors to your focus. So you can stay and perhaps do the job that as a monk can do without any kind of like anchor. But also, I think you are anchored, but you can also observe and see how they shift and rotate and deepen, and you realize that at the end, all the universe is in each symbol. And I think that's the beauty of it, and that's a beautiful part of your Reiki journey, right?
Yeah. And at the same time, the same potential is right here with
Yeah.
nothing more than this, or nothing more than breathing in and breathing out. And we're all going to be drawn to a different tool at a different time of day, in a different circumstance, in a different moment in our lives. So if we just approach that with respect, if we're open to being wrong about our preconceived notions, then we can kind of surrender to letting Reiki teach us, which is one of the things Hawayo Takata emphasized over and over again. Let Reiki teach you. One of her most famous sayings, that and hands-on Reiki on, hands-off Reiki off, which also Yamaguchi Chiyoko used to say. So obviously they got that from their teacher. But let Reiki teach you. There's there's a lot in those few words. There's allowing, surrendering, putting yourself out of the way. You're not leading this. Reiki is. And it's not the class, it's not the lineage, it's not the manual, it's not the certificate, it's the practice of Reiki. It is the experience of Reiki. It is a tangible living thing. And what it teaches you is going to be different than what it teaches any of the other people in the same course as you. It's going to be different than what it taught your teacher. It's going to be different than what taught your teacher's teacher. It's going to be different than what taught the founder, which is also strangely humbling, to think that we can permit ourselves to have a different experience than our whole Reiki family tree, as long as we're also humble enough to not assume that we should invert the family tree and put ourselves at the top.
Yeah, and I think also when we think of this practice as evolving, deepening, it also means there is no need for it to really add or change that much. If we want to do it, fine, because by itself is a changing, like it's a changing system. Like when you practice, it changes. So you don't need to literally sometimes just change it. You can actually just allow it, hold it, and allow it to change it and to change yourself, right? It's funny how I was thinking at the beginning, you said when it said like what has been different in your journey, and you said this what if. And for me, there is this image I really love when you place your hands and you place an object on it, you hold it, but you don't close your fist. And I think this is the image when I hear you talk, is like, hold the practice, practice it, but don't get attached to it or what is happening. Just really always hold it with an open hand.
Yeah, I mean, open hands can receive more. Open
Yeah.
hands go of tools that don't matter to us. Open hands can remain soft and pliable and adaptable. I took a 5-day class Shoden and Okuden with Frank Arjevapetter some years ago. Around the time I was actually like finishing the submission on my Reiki book itself, and I very sheepishly, like, I wanted to get all of the books he'd written autographed, but I was afraid to do it all in one fell swoop. So each morning I would show up with just a couple more so as not to overwhelm him. And in I think it was Reiki Best Practices, one of the ones he co-authored, which is very technique driven. The inscription just stands out clear as a day, um, and he writes in it, "The best technique is the one you don't need anymore."
Oh, that's beautiful.
And isn't it just like we were talking about with the
Yeah.
simple? It's also just like the need to be right. It's just like the 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 need to control the narrative. Like the best technique is the one you don't need anymore. And if you have that open hand, new ones fall in, old ones fall out. The simplicity emerges. So I think it's really fun to be speculative about Reiki history and Reiki influence. I think it's great to dig into an evidence-based research as well. Both things that I do are practically on a daily basis, but in a meaningful way, if I hold on to those, my palm is no longer open to practice Reiki. So I just have to remember that those don't make me a better Reiki practitioner unless they drive me to build a better relationship with my practice, which comes back to the practice over and over again.
Okay, I'm not even adding to that. That was brilliant and so beautiful to share, and I'm really grateful for that. So 3 years and a half ago, I remember we were in the pandemic. It was kind of a very crazy time because we're still in, it was, there was no vaccine. It was still kind of intense. And you were talking how part of your practice was like just having the precepts here and there, and you had it on the sticky at work. And I really love that because it's like living in the present, in the precepts for me is big part of the practice. But I never ask you which is your favorite and your most challenging precepts, and also
Oh,
changes. So I would love to hear that from you.
this is good. And absolutely it changes. This is not a static thing in my life. So, when we had that first interview, without a doubt, my mm, favorite but also most challenging, something can be more than one thing at once. Um, Precept was Shinpai Suna, worry not. When I wrote the book, that was true. For most of my life, that was true. And I'm a master worrier. I think I could like write a PhD level thesis and defend it perfectly, but also anxiously. Um, Still identify as a fairly anxious person. It's in my DNA, it's in my makeup. I have a clinical diagnosis to back that up. And it's just part of my charm, I guess. Who knows? But in the ensuing years, I'll be really honest, the hard one for me has grown to be um ikaruna, anger not.
Oh, wow.
A sense of injustice in the world that that has been really eye-opening. And in the kind of transitional period where I wasn't teaching publicly, but I would occasionally bring a student into my private studio um, before the world kind of relaxed its protections and interventions there. And she's a psychotherapist, and we were talking about the precepts and the psychology of them, and she had some strong things to say about like not getting angry, because anger is a really important piece of feedback that we need to survive in the world. Anger shows us when our needs are not being met, when our boundaries are being violated, when we're being taken advantage of, when the world is doing things that are just not okay. And it challenged me to think about what the context could be in the 2020s versus the 1920s. And I think it's perfectly okay to get angry, but we can also look to the kanji there to understand like what this might be pointing to. So if we were to look at the word for anger, ika or ikaru, whether or not we put the inflectional ending on, there's more than one reading of this word, and even the way we pronounce it, even if we don't change the orthography, don't change the writing, the way we say it, speak it, also implies different layers to it. So we could call it okoru, okoruna, anger not, and that's like everyday anger. But ikaruna, I've been told, is like a really like deep anger. It's like rage. It's like you can't help yourself. You're just angry to your core, and that to me is really expressed in the kanji. We see the root word, the radical that means slave, and then below that the word kokoro, which means heart, and it's smushed together to make the word ikar or oko in
Wow.
anger. It tells us that if we really let rage, if we really let anger take over, we become a slave to that emotion. Our heart has a lower status than the that of someone who is the lowest of society. And so it's about being informed by our anger, making meaningful choices, and not becoming the martyr. Like we don't just want to wear the victim hat and move on. So I I hold a few marginalized identities. I also hold some very privileged ones, and I'm grateful for both because they make me uniquely me. But the kind of anger and fear that I have felt at the injustice of the world being magnified in the last few years has made this a really challenging precept. But I remain hopeful because kind of like the wrathful deities that we see in esoteric Buddhism, they take that wrath, that rage, that anger, and they transform it via righteous action into fuel for enlightenment. So I think of this even if we're not all called to be activists outwardly in the world, advocating for change and showing up at rallies and being part of these collective movements in an external way, we are all called to contribute to the, we'll say, collective temperament of the planet. And we can do that on the mat, we can do that in the world. Hopefully, we do it in both places at once or in sequence. Um, and that that precept for me is reminding myself that when I feel that anger coming up, which is almost always for me some kind of fear that has been disguised, masked. I'm angry because of something I'm actually afraid about. Um, then I need to do something about it. I need to put my money where my mouth is. I need to take care of me, and I need to take care of my community. If I can do that with a financial donation, if I can do that with a donation of my time and energy or effort or other resources, if I can do that by making sure I'm amplifying other voices or just turning the volume down on mine when it matters. Um, those are the kinds of things that I am learning from that precept in these last few years, and it's been really important. And also, it's been good because I kind of grew up afraid of anger. Anger was an interesting thing in my family household growing up. I won't go into too much detail, but we saw a lot of it, and I was afraid of becoming like that. And really, I was afraid of letting anger control my decisions instead of letting it inform my decisions, and really trying to figure out why am I angry? Where is this really coming from? Is it selfish or selfless? And if we can have that kind of rage transformed into righteousness, then we're on that same path to enlightenment that we see in those wrathful deities and bodhisattvas who are, you know, cloaked in flame with their ferocious faces and giant fangs and, sometimes dismembered body parts in their hands. And they're actually here to help us work through that and come out the other side also wreathed in light. Because what is the flame of anger but another kind of light, another kind of fuel for our own spiritual development? So we just have to learn how to harness it.
That was so beautiful. So I really appreciate you sharing, being vulnerable and sharing all of that. I think also it's going to be very useful because I think when we read the news, we're so powerless that also that lack of power turns into anger sometimes. And as you said, at the end, it's just fear. But knowing that, and you said something very important, it won't control you, will inform your decisions. I think that is such a beautiful shift for all of us. So I'm really grateful you shared that. And before we end, you told me that you are doing something with music. So I know this is a Reiki podcast, but one thing I love about you is like you hold multiple passions and you write about them. But you have so much knowledge into you. So tell me a little bit about the music part that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and honestly, I can say without a doubt that Reiki is a part of my musical journey. So, I began my Reiki journey when I was well on my way towards a profession in the field of music. And I never saw that through to completion. I saw Reiki through, but I made some changes in my life. My mental health wasn't great, hence the Reiki. And I decided that the degree that I was gearing up for in music education was going to qualify me for something I did not want to do with the rest of my life, which was probably teach high school band. And God bless my band directors in school. I would not have grown into the human I am today without them, but I don't want their job. And I never really did. I just didn't know what else to do. And 20 plus years ago, we didn't really have a lot of good resources for other things you could
Yeah.
do. It was get an orchestra gig and maybe pay your bills, be a virtuoso, which I'm not cut out for, or teach music. So I was going to go that route, and it led to a lot of stress. The anxiety disorder came to a head, and I found Reiki. And eventually, I kind of shelved all of my dreams of being a musician. I kept a horn around. I play the French horn. I have since I was 11. I've been a musician even longer than that, but music was always this little outlet I had for writing. I'd keep a horn nearby. In fact, if you kind of look behind me, there's one of my
Oh, there
antiques.
it is. Yeah.
So I'll sit and clickety clack away at the computer and type out a few hundred or a few thousand words, and when I need a break, I pick up the horn, and it allows my ADHD brain to switch gears, to reset without losing that kind of flow state, that creative state, and it's been a wonderful tool. But last year I made a deal with myself when my most recent book came out, the Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia. I went to launch it, give it a soft launch at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Showcase in Arizona, and I said, I found the antique instrument of my dreams on eBay. And I said to myself, I can either go and have a really good time in Tucson and not worry about which rocks I buy, because I've just gotten my advance, and it was, I don't use my advances or my royalties as part of my budget. I try to do something responsible with them, but I also try to have some fun.
Good.
Or if I'm well behaved in Tucson, I'm going to buy this instrument. And I can very happily say that it was not an either or situation. I did both. And it kind of started me on this journey to like wanting to make music again in a more serious capacity. So I bought this French style of instrument. We think of the French horn as French, but it's actually very German. And the French style of instrument has been discontinued. People do not, by and large, play them except for a very small number of folks who have interest in historic performance. And as a very rusty instrumentalist, I got this, and I had to rewire my brain to play such a different kind of configuration of instrument. And then I just dove in. I joined a couple of ensembles. I got to have some like massive performance opportunities, which came to a head last fall, performing in the largest symphony orchestra in the United States. I actually think it's larger than that, but
Oh
the
my
largest.
God. That is so cool.
And I auditioned for a very famous horn solo. We had a Disney themed concert, and so you can't talk about symphonic Disney without also talking about Fantasia. So we had a medley of things featured in Fantasia, and that
Wow.
did the finale from Stravinsky's Firebird Suite, which opens with this beautiful chorale of a French horn solo. And so I auditioned, and I got to perform this twice to two sold out audiences of well over 1,000 people both
That's
times.
amazing, Nicholas. Congratulations.
And when I tell you, I have never been more nervous about anything in my life. I mean, I was less nervous about sending in my first manuscript, about my first time teaching, about my trip to Japan as a young adult. Anything else that I have done, I was less nervous than this. And so here's what got me through. Joshin Kokyuho.
Yeah.
Not just letting it expand from the hara, but letting it flow through my horn, letting it, you know, come out with the sound, imagining that sound itself was the light of Reiki. And I've heard the playbacks. I watched the recordings. Um, the nervous wobble that had been in my sound in the rehearsals was absent. Um,
Oh,
and I will attribute that to Reiki. And the same orchestra just finished its spring season, and we had a little horn choir feature, and there was just something that clicked about a week or two before the performance. I was giving myself a lot of Reiki before this little horn choir feature because, again, very exposed. And all of a sudden, I got the same kind of feeling I get when I'm in that flow state teaching or writing. I, I achieved it with an audience of people staring me down with the horn. And I feel like maybe I've just had a breakthrough, and Reiki was part of that. So um, I'm curious to see where that's going to take me, especially because I love the historical instruments. That's such a niche thing. I've just started lessons with them, but I'm also really inspired by the work of Japanese musician, psychologist, and Reiki practitioner named Shota Hashimoto. And he wrote a book that I saw when I went to Japan in 2009. And I remember it just so starkly. One, because I could actually read the title in Japanese, and I'm not literate very well, so that was kind of a big deal. But it was called Piano Reiki or Piano Reiki, and he's got a corresponding album also named Piano Reiki. And I've never read the book because I
Mhm.
can't. It's not been translated, but he infuses his music with Reiki, and I want to start exploring that. It's very non-traditional. It's not the kind of thing if you'd asked me 5 years ago if I'd ever be doing something like that, the answer would be no, of course not. I'm such a traditionalist, but um, kind of coming back to what has changed in the last few years. I'm open to being wrong. So we'll see where this journey takes me.
I think it's beautiful because first of all, like I'm amazed that you could like I have stage fright. So being in front of 1,000 people with and not with years of experience, just coming back to it, I'm like, wow. And for those of you who don't know, Joshinko Kyoho is a very grounding meditation, very foundational for like the more traditional Japanese styles. But I think it's and I know hands-on, like hands-on Reiki on, hands-off Reiki off, but I think at the end we're talking about being present and that's where I'm like, yes, hands-on healing treatment, yes, but we can bring our practice to everything we do. And I could almost feel that music. I wish I had been there because it was music with presence, fully embodied, and I found that beautiful. I do the same at work. I have presentation with 20 people, and I I do joshing, and I sit in a space that is not about selling an idea. It's just about connecting with the people I'm talking to, and it makes a big difference when I'm able to be in that state. And I think it's also we're talking about inviting people to reflect. It's like, and perhaps it's not Reiki as the hands-on healing, but that presence, that being in the now, with trying to be without anger and worry, without separation. Where can you bring it in your life, right? Is there one place where you can start experimenting to bring that presence there? And now I want to see a concert. I'm gonna have to go to like, why are we so far? I wish you were here.
I'll send you some recordings. How's that? Uh we've got a member who always sets up a camera and gets the whole concert.
That I think is fantastic, and if, like I would love to watch that, and I'll watch it like in the right state of mind. I won't watch it while I'm doing other things. I'll just sit and feel it. I think that's great.
Well, thank you.
Nicholas, it's always so much. You always, it's funny. I know it's going to be a great chat, but every time I talk to you, I'm blown away. So I really appreciate it. And for those of you who are not watching the video, Nicholas has gone through this, just recuperating from COVID and been an amazing, amazing team player with this. So I really appreciate it, Nicholas. Any parting words before we end?
Just gratitude. Thank you so much, Natalie. It's always a pleasure to connect, whether we do it on camera or not. I love when we chat. And thank you to everyone who's listening. And I look forward to sharing more Reiki and magic and music with all of you.
Thank you so much.